Well, black tax, rising food costs, high electricity prices when we have electricity, and a bad ratio of debt to disposable income, leaving many of us and saving for retirement the last thing on our minds for South Africans. According to the Mesa CFA Institute's Global Pension Index, South Africa's pension system leaves a lot to be desired. It was presented by Dr. David Knox at Alan Gray's first retirement benefits conference. Sounds boring, but it's not. How do we get ourselves out of this predicament before we get to retirement age? Luckily, I have an expert joining me on the show, Old Mutual's financial education head, John Manyike, joining me. Hopefully, John, to give us some kind of solutions. But before we talk about, John, saving for our pension, obviously it's never too late to start saving. COVID-19, salaries have been depleted. People have lost their jobs. Your pension, John, I'm sure is a nice, easy get-out-of-jail-free card, isn't it? But is it the right thing to do, even if you're incredibly desperate?
Well, I think there are a number of plausible scenarios that appear to be, the right thing to do when you are finding yourself in a situation where you're retrenched or you're dismissed as a result of a disciplinary inquiry. And the temptation of cashing out your retirement savings is high when a person has to think about how do they sustain their livelihood. But I think there are different ways that are available to people to look at when you are in that intersection. For example, you may want to preserve a portion of your retirement savings and simply do a partial withdrawal, and because there are also tax implications when you cash out your entire savings because of that situation. But rather preserve some of it, speak to a financial advisor, preserve some of it, and then use the other one, to sustain your life while you are deciding on your next move or applying for another job, or in some instances, people who prefer to actually start their own businesses in order to sustain their life.
Let's talk about black tax for a moment. For many people, it's considered an optional. It's a social responsibility back to your parents, back to your families, back to those who raised you, etc. But when it comes to black tax and the pressure on an individual is so severe, again, John, your pension seems like the right way to support your parents through their difficult years as well. That's a very difficult situation to find yourself in, isn't it?
That's true, but let me first start by, indicating that, the word black tax means different things to different people. There are those who actually perceive it as a burden. There are those who actually see that it's actually Ubuntu, translated as black tax, and it must be seen in a particular context. But whatever black tax means to you, we at Old Mutual call it the sandwich generation, which is the incident of being sandwiched between having to provide for your immediate family as well as your extended family. But the reality is, especially now with COVID, we're seeing a growing number of people who find themselves having to take care of their extended families and also looking after themselves. And there's so much under pressure because of salary cuts and so on. And there's certainly an opportunity for people to have an open and frank conversation with their families. Because unfortunately, a lot of people don't know how to have that conversation. It's a very delicate subject because it means different things to different people, especially when it is demanded. But in actual fact, this phenomenon of black tax is actually Ubuntu. But again, it's really how the family treats that and how the person who's supposed to make a contribution feel about the demand that's placed upon them, especially to the extent that they have to make some hard decisions about, do I prioritize my own children or do I prioritize my family, perhaps somewhere in the village?
Just in the last little bit that I have with you, John, let's try and give some practical advice to everyone who's joined us here on the show this morning. Job cuts, salary cuts, we understand that. I've heard this from friends before, that if they cash out a pension at the age of 40, they'll have enough time to make that money back. It seems like a really big savings account that, if they're going to work the next, let's say, 20, 25 years, 30 years maybe, they'll make that money back. Is that a wise decision to make?
Definitely, I wouldn't recommend that to anyone, because when you withdraw, remember, I mean, you've missed out an opportunity of a compound interest. As much as one appreciates that there are instances where one may not have a choice but to actually dip into it because the person still has to live. And this is why you need to speak to a financial advisor. You need to have a plan on what to do with the retirement money, especially if you were forced to take it because maybe you lost your job. But it's not mathematically speaking, I mean, even if you say life begins at 40 and you want to start, recovering, it's going to take a lot, because you're going to have to contribute much more than somebody who is at the same age as yourself, who may have started contributing towards retirement and at an early age. So mathematically speaking, it's quite a cumbersome exercise to actually get to recover everything.
John, final question to you. Let's lower the income groups for a moment. Perhaps you and I are talking about the more middle to upper class. Let's talk about those who are in the lower income brackets and possibly compounded by the loss of income. By cashing in a pension, John, I'm sure you'll agree with me, that could literally mean the difference between keeping the roof over your head and putting the basics of food on the table. Forget about black tax, forget about covering your car installment. We're talking about existing day-to-day, and cashing in your pension, however small, might be the only way to stop your children from going hungry.
Yeah, well, I think let's be honest. I mean, there are such instances where this seems to be the only way, and hence the question, perhaps looking at that, your example, and somebody also who has not accumulated enough, that might be the only option you have. But the most important thing is, do you know how to manage a lump sum? Because as soon as a family knows that, this one is getting a lump sum, you do tend to have a situation where people remind you that you're a deputy breadwinner, and they expect something from there. So you still need to make some hard financial decision about the money that you are receiving, but you also need to be exploring how can you actually multiply that, but also being very cautious of scams out there, because even if you're getting a bit of a lump sum, you do have people who want to take advantage of you knowing how desperate you are and promise you other investment vehicles with returns that are so outrageous and that sound too good to be true.
John, this really will be my final question to you. I can almost hear somebody at home watching you and I talk, asking about the pension payment suspension. So right now, I've got a pension, I'm not able to come through every month. The pension seems to be a good way to save a few £100, maybe a couple of £1,000. What does that do, and a final question to you, if I decide to rather suspend my pension payment for now, just simply to put petrol in my car to get to the office? Is that something that I can go to my financial advisor with and go, please suspend this? I don't know for how long. How long is COVID going to last? Is that an option? And what does that do for me down the road? Last question to you.
Well, I think if you work for an employer, I mean, companies have rules. There are, rules that governs the type of fund that you're in, that unless it's a decision made by an employer to stop contributions, or they give you that option, it's not an exercise you can just do on yourself. With retirement annuity, yes, there are instances where you could speak to your service provider and say, I'm not able to make contributions, but at the later stage, I would like to continue. But it is, unfortunately, it is what it is, because no one could have anticipated how the pandemic will unfold. And I think financial institutions need to do their best to be as flexible and accommodative as possible to the customers who find themselves in this situation when such requests are made, given what we know now.
John Manyike, thank you very much indeed. What a pleasure speaking to you this morning. Head of Financial Education from Old Mutual, John Manyike. I suppose also it could be a case of don't ignore your creditors. If you can't make the payments, rather speak to them. Don't just ignore their phone calls, ignore the emails. I'm sure they can make a plan for you. If you're in that situation, many people are. Don't just ignore your banks. Don't ignore your car payments. Phone them. Make a plan. Do not get yourself blacklisted.